Here is a talk on wisdom based on Proverbs 1 through 9. I'll begin by reading Proverbs verses 10 to 13. Oh, also I should mention that the content of this is based on the book Hear My Son by Daniel Estes. Proverbs 4, 10 to 13. Listen, my son, accept what I say, and the years of your life will be many. I instruct you in the way of wisdom, and lead you along straight paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hampered. When you run, you will not stumble. Hold on to instruction, do not let it go. Guard it well, for it is your life. So, imagine a son is about to leave for university to a far-off country like England or somewhere, and his father sits him down to prepare him for life ahead. What might dad say to son to prepare him? What is the most important thing that this parent can say to his child before he flies the nest? Well, Proverbs tells us that the answer is wisdom. Now, Proverbs is a book divinely inspired by God to instruct God's people on how they should live. So this is the single best source for summarizing the values of how to live as God's people. And this book holds up wisdom as the thing to be pursued above all else. However, I don't think we use the word wisdom much these days. I mean, when was the last time any of us heard someone being described as wise, or when have we ever been described as wise? So it would help if we first knew what Proverbs means by wisdom, and therefore how we should think about it. But first, before we answer that question, there are a few basic pieces of knowledge that we need to have before we can give a definition of wisdom. So the book of Proverbs rests on the assumption that God made the world, and that's really important. So unlike the ancient Greeks and what they believed, the world didn't just come about when some Greek god had his belly ripped open and out fell the earth. Nor did the universe come about via some atoms doing crazy, chaotic things. No. Proverbs rests on the assumption that the universe is the structured and ordered creation of God's making. Knowing that God is the creator shows that he is not only the source of all the physical stuff that we can touch and see, but also of all value, hope, and purpose. The stuff that we can't touch that gives meaning to life. This means that the world is not just utter randomness, where humans have no ability to predict what will happen in response to our actions. Instead, we can know that there is a relationship between acts and consequences that are generally true, and this should be a comfort to us. God doesn't just change the rules on a whim. His plans and purposes are everlasting. This solid foundation means our minds can be used to help us decide what to do and what those actions will probably lead to. Therefore, wisdom can be thought of as living in accordance with God's creative order. Wisdom is not just about some crafty scheming, and it goes beyond mere human intelligence. It is rooted in God and living according to God's standard of right and wrong. Right and wrong is not just the will of the monarch or the majority, but right and wrong is set by God's standard, which is above all of us. What this also means is that wisdom cannot be had outside of God. We cannot just rely on ourselves. We must live in accordance with what God has shown us. The more you understand God and his ways, the greater your wisdom will be for going through life. Proverbs is clear in the importance of wisdom, and it talks about there being two paths in life, and you need to decide which one you will walk down. Will it be the path of wisdom or the path of wickedness? You have the freedom to choose, and it's a tremendous responsibility. You're not just a robot pre-programmed by your genetics or your upbringing to live in a certain way, but you have the freedom to make a decision. So what will it be? Wisdom or wickedness? So that's what wisdom is, and that's why it's important. It's living in accordance with God's order. But what does that actually mean? The first thing to know is that moral questions are forefront when it comes to wisdom. It is a matter of right and wrong, not a matter of using wisdom to get what you want. An evil person might say, don't rob because you might get caught. The wise person says, do not rob because it is evil and against God's order. It is important to realize that wisdom is not just about your outward actions, because they can be done for all sorts of different reasons. Wisdom focuses on the development of the inner person, not just what you do in the outside world. Wisdom means not only knowing what is right, but also wanting to do what is right. For instance, this is how wisdom portrays wealth in two very different ways. Proverbs shows that if wealth is gained at the expense of wisdom, then it is a poisonous fruit which will harm the person. However, Proverbs also says in chapter 8 verse 18, "Riches and honour are with me, enduring wealth and righteousness." Wealth is toxic if the heart and intentions are evil. However, they can be a blessing if the heart is pursuing wisdom. Proverbs goes on to say, "My fruit is better than gold, even fine gold." Wealth can be had if one chooses wisdom, but Proverbs shows that you choose wisdom for its own sake, and that money is only ever a bonus tacked on. Wealth is worthless unless it is a measure of the intrinsic worth of its possessor. Wisdom also criticizes the desire for absolute freedom, the desire to be whoever and do whatever you want. The best life here on earth is found in a life within limits, freedom within form. You see, wisdom lines up with the standards of the Old Testament law, and this is because both of them ultimately come from God and His order in creating the world. These limits that God sets in place, these laws which should rule our lives, are not there to constrain and to squash us, but to allow us to live. You know, a kite requires to be tethered to a string to fly, and we must live in the bounds that God has set for us to have joy in this life. How are we to spot wise people, and how do we know if we are wise? Well, there are a few traits that should be present in all who possess wisdom. The first is commitment. I'm sure we've all crammed for an exam and worked really hard to pass, and then promptly forget everything we've learnt and be no better off than we were before, except now we've got a piece of paper saying that we're really clever. This is not the way of wisdom. Wisdom is having the truth in your mind at all times. It is something that you don't achieve and then move past, but it is a lifelong companion in life. Wisdom also provides protection in life, because there are many things trying to lead you from the path of wisdom onto the path of wickedness. Your own self, your friends or people your own age, and those above you, whether old or more important. And Proverbs in the Bible in general is realistic. It knows that there is evil out there and in here, and it warns you against it. And what wisdom does is it will give you discretion, the ability to have independent thought, to take the situation that you're in, think about it, and then resist any seductions in this world that might tempt you to do evil. However, most importantly, wisdom leads to knowledge of God. This is the chief end of wisdom, knowledge of God and a relationship with Him. More important than knowing how to live well and avoiding sin is knowing God and giving thanks to Him. If you miss that as the ultimate aim of wisdom, then you miss wisdom entirely and you'll just end up in a ditch. The whole of the Christian message is about restoring our relationship with God, and what it teaches about wisdom is no exception. So how do we actually get wisdom, and how does one become wise? Well, it starts with two things that both involve a radical change in outlook. The first thing to get wisdom is a fear of God. Now, that phrase is maybe a bit alien to us and perhaps quite scary to hear. Fear can mean dread and terror, but it can also mean awe and reverence. When we talk about the fear of God, both of those descriptions are true. If God created the universe and everything in it, along with how it runs, then that shows how powerful, wise, and just huge God is. If you don't feel a bit uneasy about that, then you're not thinking straight. However, God wants us to know him. He wants us to be in a relationship with him. And that should produce awe and reverence. We should be overwhelmed by the fact that God wants us to know him. We need to have a right approach to God because he is the source of wisdom. And if we're not right with him, and if we're not approaching him in the right way, then we will not have wisdom. We cannot get wisdom on our own. We must give up our independence and rely on God. You might think, that seems so sacrilege against human understanding. But human understanding has been shown to be fallible again and again. But God will always prove true. Therefore, seek him and get wisdom from him. The second radical change is that wisdom is not just a nice to have bonus add-on in life. Real life cannot be had unless it is consciously sought. Wisdom is not a native ability for humans, but it is a matter of discipline. We must give up our own selfish personal desires, what we want out of life, and instead live under God's good and loving rule. So, practically speaking, what are some of the ways that can help us gain wisdom? Well, we cannot do that on our own. We need God, and we need others who are wiser than us and more experienced than us. We need teachers. Now, no doubt some of us will have absolutely hated teachers, and maybe still hate teachers for the detentions they give out, for the boring lessons they teach, and the fact that they always seem to pick on us. However, having someone guide you through life is really important. If left to your own devices, you would sway from one extreme to the other, as you would have no idea the true way forward. Learning solely from your own experience is risky. The wise person learns from the experience of others. A good teacher is like a guide, someone who can tell you directly certain truths and warn you of certain dangers. But they provide a framework for the student to then think through their life decisions without the teacher telling them exactly what to do in each and every situation. The teacher neither dominates the student, nor do they ignore any and every input that the student has, but they don't just give you free rein. You and the teacher should work together to pursue wisdom. They respect you as they provide reasons for the fundamental rules of life. They provide the reasoning behind ways in which you should live. And you should respect them and acknowledge the respect that they have for you, but then also the insight that they have and their wisdom over you. Having a teacher is massively important, as they can teach you what the best minds of the past centuries have taught on life. If you ignore this, then you will be destined to repeat the same mistakes that people before you have made. Everyone learns from experience. The wise person learns from the experience of others. In the Bible, the opposite of wisdom is called folly. And folly is an intellectual deficiency, but an inability or an unwillingness to conform to Yahweh's order. Some people are incapable of learning, not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack humility. Do not think you cannot be wise because you're not getting the grades that everyone else is getting. You're wise if you're humble and learn from God and learn from others what wisdom really is. So you, whoever you are, have a choice today. You can choose the way of wisdom and find life, true love, and most importantly, God. Or you can turn your back on wisdom and find only isolation from others, bitterness towards the world for not working the way that you want it to work, and eventually you'll find death. I encourage you strongly to choose wisdom.